All right, welcome back everybody to the second channel. Today we have a poetry collection. It's called Front Range by Samuel Dymerski. And if you like what you see here, you can find more of Samuel's work on Twitter and on Instagram. I'll link both of his socials down in the description right at the top. He is at Dymerski_Samuel on Twitter and at MossmanSam on Instagram. We do have a couple content warnings here: climate anxiety, homelessness, and wealth disparity. And keep in mind, I am not a professional reviewer. I'm just some guy on the internet who likes reading and writing. The opinions expressed in this video are only opinions. My interpretation of or reaction to the work will not be the same as everyone else's, for better or for worse. I will look for the good and the bad, but no matter what I say, don't be too hard on yourself. Just keep writing. And for those in the comments, please be respectful. Also, I'm so sorry for any mistakes or mispronunciations of names or words. If I come across a word that I don't want to say for whatever reason, I will replace it with the word blank. All right. So I've got about 35 minutes here. We're going to make the most of that time. This is a long collection, and we're just going to basically get through as much as we can in about a half an hour. So the first thing, before we even get into the poem, center-aligned poetry is usually seen as kind of amateurish, but we'll see if it really kind of distracts from the actual meat of the work. So this first poem is called Florescentia, and hang on one second. Okay. Out in the hills just beyond Springs, there live the memory of redwood forests, held up in the silts of time where once stood towering giants and verdant undergrowth. Now shadowy striations of those old forms have been left in carbon lace, and on papers of pressed sediment, a glade of flowers, leaves, and wasps has been so immaculately kept that one could swear behind them to see a purposed hand. I keep to myself hills made of books, flowers in ink and lettering, in the hopes of describing my found home, as eventually did those immemorial shales. Okay, so some engaging language, I notice, first of all. I'm going to look up a couple of these words because I certainly do not know them off the top of my head. So let's see. We've got striations. Hang on. A tiny groove, scratch, or channel, especially one of a parallel series. Cool, very cool. And then down here we had shales. Oh, I've heard that before. I couldn't tell you what it means, though. Yeah, it's another geology term. A sedimentary rock made up of clay and other minerals. Cool. Yeah, I think I'm going to reread it real quick. Join me as we reread it. Let's see. Out in the hills just beyond Springs, there lived the memory of redwood forests. Okay, so that, I noticed that as we read it the first time. I think it should be lives, right? Since memory is singular, there lives the memory of redwood forests. Held up in the silts of time, where once stood towering giants and verdant undergrowth. Sorry, I'm just going to read that one more time, just because there is something I want to highlight about the way this stanza reads. Out in the hills just beyond Springs, there lived the memory of redwood forests, held up in the silts of time, where once stood towering giants and verdant undergrowth. I think that just reads quite well, if I'm being honest. I kind of like forests and giants. It's not like even really a slant rhyme, if we're being honest, but I don't know, they sound good, placed where they are. Second stanza. Now shadowy striations of those old forms have been left in carbon lace, and on papers of pressed sediment, a glade of flowers, leaves, and wasps has been so immaculately kept that one could swear behind them to see a purposed hand. That's kind of interesting, this idea that the landscape has been, quote-unquote, preserved, immaculately kept, right, on purpose, as if by some higher power. I kind of like that. I like the way that stanza is phrased and the way it kind of progresses. Third stanza, I keep to myself hills made of books, flowers in ink and lettering, in the hopes of describing my found home, as eventually did those immemorial shales. Okay, so the speaker wants to immortalize this place with their writing, it sounds like. Um, so if I'm not mistaken, it sounds like the landscape was petrified, like those trees that turned to stone, right? That's probably an oversimplification, but maybe that's not the case though. I don't know. I wish I were an environmental scientist. That would probably help my understanding a little more. But for all of my lack of understanding here, I think this is quite good, both rhythmically and in terms of language. Um, I don't know about like the Ars Poetica going on here, where suddenly it's kind of poetry about poetry. I don't know. I've gotten a little tired of poems and stories that are self-referential in that way, but it didn't take me out of it too much. I don't know. Just something to consider. I think the language is overall very strong, and that is the most important thing for me. So, oh, and I was going to look up the title too, Florescentia. Hang on. An extinct genus of flowering plants in the, I don't even know, Malvaceae subfamily, known from western North America and far eastern Asia. Flower, fruit, and pollen compression fossils have been found in formations ranging from the early Eocene through the early Oligocene periods. Okay, so perhaps the poem then is specifically about this one fossilized flower, or the flower. This, the author chose just this one to refer to the broader landscape. Maybe, I don't know. I can't tell for sure, but I know that I like it. It's pretty good. Also the spacing. So it's center aligned, which is, I don't know. It's not for me. But then there's also a space between each line, which also is really not for me. I think, I don't know. I think if you wanted to make this look like, you know, a poem that you might submit somewhere, you would left align the whole thing and you would make it all single spaced. And of course, with a single space between each stanza. So that you could call that nitpicking for sure, but and it's kind of nice that it fits the whole page, I guess. I don't know. Just kind of depends on your cup of tea and what you might say, but anyway, this next one is called Dialogue 1. For years I scoured hillsides of wind-blown grass, and from the wild flowers would reap seeds that I would come to rear into this thing I call myself. Now here I stand, 1 foot over the precipice of another transformation, and you behind me. So this is how I'm repaid. My roots, as oft inclined, are those of xeric plants, plunge deep into the dirt to unearth them, to try would split us both at scattered nodes. Why then do you insist? What moves a person to vacate their places, left in their wake, ghost towns for one? I'm eager for a change of pace. With you I bide my time. You dog, you say this to all the girls? Okay. So I'm interested to see kind of what the parentheticals are in relation to the rest of the text. One thing that struck me is had a pretty good rhythm, especially in this stanza right here, this second to last stanza. But yeah, let's go through it again. So, for years I scoured hillsides of wind-blown grass, and from the wild flowers would reap seeds that I would come to rear into this thing I call myself. Those two lines, that I would come to rear into this thing I call myself, sounds just a tiny bit awkward in my opinion. Like a little bit convoluted is all. But otherwise, it's a decent stanza, I think. You could argue that maybe the word scoured, maybe you could replace that with something, and windblown. You could replace those with maybe lesser used adjectives. Or, sorry, this one's a verb. And this one's an adjective. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's a fine stanza, personally. Now here I stand, 1 foot over the precipice of another transformation, and you behind me. So this is how I'm repaid. Okay, so it sounds like these parentheticals are the you speaking. And just based on what we know about the rest of the poem, it sounds like, we have the speaker and the you, I guess, is their lover, potentially. So, my roots, as oft inclined, are those of xeric plants, plunge deep into the dirt. Should it be plunged? I that that's what feels natural because it would be describing the roots, right? That's just my thinking. To unearth them, to try, would split us both at scattered nodes. Why then do you insist? Hmm. Okay. If I'm understanding that correctly, I think I like the metaphor. It sounds like, this person is changing and they have, somebody that they deeply care about. And it sounds like they want them to change too. Or maybe they want them to realize that they're changing, but they're changing together. And the second speaker here, or at least we assume this is a separate second speaker, they're not convinced or they're just not so sure about the whole thing. Yeah. What moves a person to vacate their places, left in their wake, ghost towns for one? I'm eager for a change of pace. With you, I bide my time. Yeah, that's decent rhythm there. Um, that said, I feel like we've suddenly kind of mixed metaphors, or maybe just moved on to a new metaphor, because it sounded like the speaker was referring to themselves as a plant before, right? But then down here, or maybe this isn't a metaphor at all. Maybe they're being quite literal in the sense that they do, like, literally want to go somewhere else. And then I chuckled a little bit at the ending, which I still do think is funny. Like, it's very poetic language, and the second speaker says, "You say this to all the girls." Like, can you imagine? I assume they are saying it sarcastically, right? But yeah. I kind of get the vibe, and I do kind of like what's going on. Um, I guess I was just a little thrown by some of the shifts, but that's just me. Smarter readers will probably get it better than I do. But like I said, I kind of like the basis. I like what's going on here. I don't even mind the parentheticals and the second speaker. I think there's something interesting to be had there. So yeah, not bad. This one was called Dialogue 1. Okay, yeah, checks out, makes sense. Central City, in parentheses. Let's see. Okay, yeah, I just had to make sure the other titles weren't in parentheses. So, a die cast in the gulch of wealth ephemeral. Colorado is a story of municipal siblings growing to consume one another. Here too, with those twin settlements built on fortune's whisper. Now those same lodgings have given way to cathedrals of chance, their parapets boastful, so audacious as to claim that we too could be as mountains. But ascending the hillsides, these tall tales seem to diminish, and from them, as anthills appear, the strewn about vestiges of old cobblestone barriers, further upward, and the city falls beneath. At its crown a cemetery, whose perimeter ringed with quaking aspen and serviceberry trees. Some say that if you press an ear to one of the plots, you'll hear their eternal residents murmuring, still, for their slice of the commons. Interesting. It's odd to me that this line seems centered in a different way from the rest of the lines. Like as if you hit tab right before it. I don't know. Let's go through it again. I will say, now that we've read this third poem, the style is quite consistent all throughout, so the author definitely has their own poetic voice. But yeah, let's go through it. So, Central City, a die cast in the gulch of wealth ephemeral. So, as soon as I saw that word, I just couldn't help but think, like, this is a word I've seen a bunch of times in other poems. Uh, Maybe I am on r/OC poetry too much or whatever. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's got to be a word that we can replace ephemeral with, or a series of words, right? Because personally, I'm just tired of seeing this pop up in poems, but that's just me. Colorado is a story of municipal siblings growing to consume one another. Here too, with those twin settlements built on fortune's whisper. So I imagine the municipal siblings, I take that as a metaphor for buildings or just urbanization, I guess you could say, warring urbanizations. And I like that. And if I'm correct, then I like what that visual is doing. And I think this whole growing to consume one another thing is neat. And you could almost even build on that. We'll see maybe if the poem builds on it further, but, like, I don't know, you could do some allusion to, like, a Greek monster or something, or, I don't know, consider Colorado's history. Maybe there are, uh, native legends within its history that might lend even further to this visual. Um, Now those same lodgings have given way to cathedrals of chance, their parapets boastful, so audacious as to claim that we too could be as mountains. Okay, I'm gonna look up parapets real quick. A low protective wall along the edge of a roof, bridge, or balcony. Cool, good word. Um, Sorry, I'm just kind of thinking over this stanza. Um, yeah, it's like in the reading of, this being about like urbanization or big businesses, monopolies coming to, devour the city, it kind of sounds like we take these cathedrals as, more big businesses, promising that, individuals can become mountains. Cause like, you know, it sounds like the whole capitalist rags to riches spiel that those MLM people will try and sell you, right? How would you like to get rich by doing nothing or whatever? And really, it's just a way to, increase the wealth of those at the top. So if I'm reading this correctly, I like where it's going. Third stanza. But ascending the hillsides, these tall tales seem to diminish, and from them, as anthills appear, the strewn about vestiges of old cobblestone barriers. Okay. But ascending the hillsides, these tall tales seem to diminish, and from them, as anthills appear. Oh, okay. So I was confused. I was misreading. I thought as anthills appear meant like anthills were literally popping up, but no, obviously what it's saying is that uh, these, quote unquote mountains or these cathedrals, once you look at them from a distance, they look like anthills. So that makes sense. It's false promises, right? Yeah, assuming this whole thing is still about capitalism, it's pure false promises. Um, yeah. And, like I said, I'm still not 100% sure that I'm reading this correctly, but if I am, like I said, I like where it's going and I kind of like, the language and the metaphors. Yeah. Fourth stanza, further upward, and the city falls beneath, at its crown a cemetery, whose perimeter ringed with quaking aspen and serviceberry trees. Um, my immediate, like, knee-jerk reaction to this stanza is to say, I want more imagery with the cemetery, and in that imagery, more context, too. Who is buried at this cemetery? Why does it exist? And I mean, I can make some educated guesses, I suppose, but yeah, I think a little bit more there would be nice. Some say that if you press an ear to one of the plots, you'll hear their eternal residents murmuring still for their slice of the commons. Okay, silly me. There was there was some more context right there. Still, some more imagery could be helpful, like maybe a couple more tangible images, debatably. But we do get some more context here. So it sounds like at this cemetery we have the people who bought into the false promises and lost their lives because of it. So yeah, the whole thing sounds like a metaphor for late stage capitalism, for the evils of industrialization. And with that in mind, I think Central City makes sense as a title. Don't really understand why it's in parentheses, but I don't know. That's just me. But otherwise, I kind of liked this one. And like I said, I think you can even capitalize on the strengths here. You can expand on this metaphor about mutual consumption. You can expand on the cemetery a little bit. And I think that would only add to everything that's working here personally. But I liked this. This might be my favorite of the batch so far. Debatably, I don't know. It's been a good batch, but we've got about 15-ish minutes left, maybe 10. At least on my schedule. That's what I have left. So let's keep going. Laramidia. Okay, let's look that up real quick. Laramidia was an island continent that existed during the late Cretaceous period when the western interior seaway split the continent of North America in two. In the Mesozoic era, Laramidia was an island landmass separated from Appalachia to the east by the western interior seaway. Okay, interesting. One thing I want to note is, I love unique words and strong language within reason, and I feel like these poems are within reason. That being said, it is kind of an acquired taste. Like, I think maybe most readers don't enjoy poetry the same way I do. Uh, I don't know, that's maybe an overgeneralization. I can't speak for everyone. And I think I mentioned this actually in a recent video on this same channel, but uh, I was in a creative writing class during my undergraduate, and there was one peer of mine who wrote really poetically, and my fellow students didn't love it, but I was a pretty big fan personally. And so just keep in mind that this kind of poetry probably won't appeal to the broadest of audiences, but if you enjoy writing it, that's great. And if it lands with the right audience, that's great too. And personally, I like pretty much all of what I've read so far, for the most part. I think the changes that need to be made are pretty minimal. And really, the major advice I've offered is just kind of building upon what's already strong. But anyway, that's just something that you as the author can consider. So anyway, Laramidia. I had last night a dream in granite shelves and seaways, where the ocean, emboldened, swept through the plains and the hills, young and impetuous, met their charge with an embrace. To love something is to quietly fear it. Time is a measure of distance, so you ought to watch it before you're stranded. The world furrows its brow, and the water dispels in sheets. Halcyon days are done. The crinoids calcify in their banks. In the wake of truths larger than ourselves, we suffice to tell each other stories. As the oceans departed, they guaranteed the mountains we will meet again in pieces, and I'll leave in you pockets of myself, so you'll never be free of me. Then the world, newly dry, newly cold, sighed in its lonesome and pressed upward, a mineral belt, a tome of rippling gneiss, found by a nascent biota, who never thought to read it. Here come the flowers, the fauna, to Laramidia, growing into itself, a garden of the sun. Okay. Immediately, I'm liking a lot of what I'm seeing here. And thankfully, I had the context to understand the title. It was good that I looked it up beforehand. But yeah, I'm liking a lot of what's here. And again, I think most of my commentary here will be about how you can capitalize on some of the strengths. But one thing I do want to point out first, reading this very first line, this opening, I had last night a dream in granite shelves. So the rhythm's not bad, but the phrasing is a little awkward, right? I had last night a dream. It's like, I know that these poems aren't conversational, but it just immediately kind of triggers something in the reader's mind when something sounds off like that, right? So I think there's a way you could rephrase that to make it sound more natural without sacrificing the poetic quality, right? Because it just sounds like too archaic, and I wouldn't describe the rest of the tone as archaic, like maybe formal and poetic, but not really archaic, right? I hope that makes sense. That might sound like, I don't know, splitting hairs or nitpicking, and I would understand. But anyway. I had last night a dream in granite shelves and seaways, where the ocean, emboldened, swept through the plains and the hills, young and impetuous, met their charge with an embrace. Young and impetuous, it's just more of those adjectives that I feel like I've heard a lot before in poetry. Might not be the same for every reader, but I don't know, just one man's opinion, just one reader's opinion. And keep in mind, I do read quite a bit of poetry, so that's going to affect my thoughts, obviously. I don't know, that sounded silly and obvious to say, but anyway. These lines struck me for sure. To love something is to quietly fear it, and I almost wished there were a little bit more about that. You could argue the rest of the poem gives a little bit more about that, debatably. Time is a measure of distance, so you ought to watch it before you're stranded. The world furrows its brow, and the water dispels in sheets. Halcyon days are done. The crinoids calcify in their banks. So another good thing I wanted to point out was the personification of the world here. That's kind of neat, the way it furrows its brow, and later I think it says, like, that it's bored. Yeah, sighed and it's lonesome. Yeah, we'll come back to that in just a second. One thing I do want to look up is crinoids. Okay. Crinoids are marine invertebrates that make up the class Crinoidea. If you were seeing what I was seeing, kind of looks like sea sponges almost. Let's see. So there are some that remain attached to the sea floor and are commonly called sea lilies, and the unstalked forms called feather stars or comatulids are members of the largest crinoid order. Interesting. I get that doesn't really like change our understanding of the poem, but I was mostly curious for my own sake. So this stanza's pretty good. And like I said, like having the context of the title helps a lot because before you're stranded, we know that something is about to happen to the landscape that's going to separate one massive land into two, right? I like that just the furrowing of the world's brow is enough to, move the water so dramatically. I think that's a nice touch. Third stanza. In the wake of truths larger than ourselves, we suffice to tell each other stories. As the oceans departed, they guaranteed the mountains. We will meet again in pieces, and I'll leave in you pockets of myself, so you'll never be free of me. Yeah, that struck me. It's arguably the most didactic part of the poem, but obviously it's still working in a poetic sense because this whole thing is a metaphor for, the title, the division of this land mass. And so it's easy, thanks to the dialogue, to kind of apply what's going on here to ourselves, right? We imagine this as lovers who are separated by circumstances out of their control. And these lines are very romantic. We will meet again in pieces, and that's an interesting phrase, actually, now that I read it one more time. We will meet again in pieces. It's like, literally in the context of the poem, there's, a great change that's about to happen in land, in structure. But if, we're personifying everything that's happening here, and so to say, we will meet again in pieces, it's like, what does that mean for a person, right? So that's kind of interesting. Anyway, I'll leave in you pockets of myself, so you'll never be free of me. I like it. Like, you could argue you'll never be free of me is maybe like a bit cliche, but I like pockets of myself. We will meet again in pieces is, like I said, very interesting to consider. So, yeah, it's very striking. Then the world, newly dry, newly cold, sighed in its lonesome and pressed upward. So sighed in its lonesome is also a little bit awkward because like lonesome is usually an adjective rather than a noun, right? So hang on one second. Yeah, Google doesn't even like provide a definition for lonesome as a noun. So like it would be loneliness, right? But I understand if you want it to sound more poetic than that. It's just lonesome being the wrong form of the word. It just threw me. It sounded incorrect, right? But anyway. Sighed in its lonesome and pressed upward. And again, like the last movement of the earth, that just the sigh is able to cause something kind of cataclysmic, right? I like it. A mineral belt, a tome of rippling gneiss. I was going to look up that word too. Gneiss. A high-grade metamorphic rock, meaning that it has been subjected to higher temperatures and pressures than schist. It is formed by the metamorphosis of granite or sedimentary rock. Gneiss displays distinct foliation representing alternating layers of composed of different materials. Very cool. I don't know if I said this already, but I'm going to emphasize it further. It's great when you can take something you're interested in and incorporate it into your poetry, like something aside from English and poetry itself, right? So, Walt Whitman, for example, he just loved to talk about nature. And obviously, you can see that in his poems. And here we have like geology specifically, and just kind of nature more broadly, which is great, but a lot of geological references here. And I think that's really cool. Like, it's inaccessible in a way because I have to be looking up these words, but it's still cool, like genuinely for me. Can't speak for everyone, but it reminds me of like, I don't know, this is a non-poetry example, but like Stephen Hillenburg, right? He loved marine biology, and so he decided he wanted to make a cartoon about marine biology, and he made SpongeBob, and it was great, right? It's just awesome that people take the things that intrigue them and turn them into art, right? I think that's one of the signs of an artist is, taking the things you notice and making expression out of them. And that's true for, even people who just study English like me. Like, no doubt you still notice things in the world around you, right? And sorry to be harping on this for so long, but it's like everyone is capable of poetry. Everyone can be a poet. Everyone can write a poem. It's just a matter of whether you write down the things that you notice, right? So anyway, sorry to get caught on that point for a while. Let's get back to this stanza. Found by a nascent biota who never thought to read it. Okay, sorry. I went on too much of a tangent and I forgot the context of the stanza. Then the world, newly dry, newly cold, sighed in its lonesome and pressed upward, a mineral belt, a tome of rippling gneiss, found by a nascent biota who never thought to read it. Hmm. Okay, yeah, so the fact that you call the mineral belt a tome makes sense. Why you would say read it. Yeah. Sorry, just gonna check on one more thing. Yeah. Okay. I guess that works. Next stanza. Oh, last stanza. Here come the flowers, the fauna, Teleramidia, growing into itself, a garden of the sun. That seems almost biblical, which is kind of cool. Kind of reminds one of Eden, right? So neat. Very neat. All right. Let's see. How am I doing on time? Oh, not great. Okay. Might need to call it there, unfortunately. Yeah, these are a little bit lengthy, but this was cool. I liked a lot of this, and like I said, it'll hit with the right audience, I'm sure. And it's just cool, like just all of these incorporations from, I assume, your life, the author. Like maybe you are a geologist, or maybe, geology just really interests you. And whatever the case, that's great. Like really, really great, man. Um, so let's wrap things up one more time. These poems came to us from Samuel Dymerski, and you can find him or them on Twitter or on Instagram. And yeah, I enjoyed these. Find the strengths, capitalize on them when necessary, and look for any of those phrases that might sound a little off, or for any words that might sound a little overdone. And those are really kind of the biggest pieces of feedback I've got on these, but this was very enjoyable, a good read. Um, yeah, a lot of striking stuff in these poems, so awesome. Viewers, thank you for watching, and share your thoughts if you got any. And keep in mind, this is a rough draft.